Welcome back to The Real Recovery Show. We meet every week at noon on Fridays, and we talk about a myriad of different topics, all relating to recovery. Recovery from drugs, recovery from bad programming, PTSD, codependency. It's really important to hit this from different angles. I'm super excited about all the different episodes that we've had so far and the topics that we've been able to cover. And today's episode also is very special to me because it deals with an aspect of addiction and affliction that there's a big stigma and stereotype to, and misunderstanding and ignorance and arrogance and judgment. And sometimes if you haven't had an experience that parallels it, you may not understand it. You may even have a family member who's gone through it and not understand it. Just like with addiction, a lot of people who don't understand it will think, why don't you just stop? Why can't you just stop? And when it comes to homelessness, that's the same thing. There's a lot of judgment, and one of my biggest passions, underlying purposes in my life with the meeting space and a lot of the stuff I've done over the years has to do with just bridging that gap and getting rid of that stigma, because it's the stigma that separates us and makes us think that we're better than or less than someone else, and that someone somehow in that is not deserving of love and compassion. And I think it's when we get to a place where we see ourselves in other people that we're truly joining and seeing that we're all the same. And that, to me, is the true definition of love and forgiveness and tolerance and the goal of recovery, too. So I grew up in a big house. We had money, but it was a really sick environment inside the house. And so I felt very much alone. I felt like I was in survival mode. So when I ended up becoming a stripper, and I ended up getting very more involved in drugs, and went through an experience and lost everything. I had my own house from stripping. I had a whole bunch of stuff going on. I lost everything. I lost my health. I was in and out of a semi-comatose state, and ended up put on psychiatric medication, and I had experienced homelessness for the first time. And it was in some ways normal to me, even though there were experiences I had had just a couple of years before that if you would have told me that that's where I would have been, I would say no way, because I thought I knew the trajectory of my life with the running and gunning, and I'm just going to this and I'm just going to that. I thought I had a lot more power over things than I did. But it was a lot more comfortable and a lot more normal. There was a lot that fed into the survival skills that I thought I had, growing up in an abusive childhood. But also, I've come to see this later, that a lot of times we judge our lives from a certain perspective at a certain point in it, and sometimes we judge other people for where we think they're at and where we think they should be at a certain point. And it's kind of like you gotta really look at the whole timeline to see the subtle different decisions and choices and things that happen, the traumas, the letdowns, the disappointments, the confusion, the depression, maybe the using things or substances or people, or the survival skills, the headspace, and little by little, we make decisions that we think we're making consciously, but it's always, a good portion of our past and our story of who we think we are all comes together to make each decision that we make, if we're whether we're listening to sometimes our intuition or not. But if we're listening to our intuition, we'll be more likely making the decision for the next upward right step. But if we're not, because we're coping, reacting, struggling, running on programming, very much focused on things being a certain way, we can end up little by little by little crossing lines that we thought we'd never cross. And as we cross one line, it gets more comfortable. And then we realize the next line isn't so bad. And then next thing you know, you get to a place where you can't believe you are where you are. And whether it's homelessness or drugs and alcohol or doing things with work, even like when I first became a stripper, and I said I was never going to sleep with anybody for money. I said I wasn't going to do a lot of things I ended up doing. And I've been homeless twice in my life, and one with drug addiction and one without drug addiction, one with PTSD, man, and just being shut down, depressed, and just, you know, a big case of the fuck-its, because I just didn't have it. I just couldn't deal. And so, you know, everybody's story is different, and it's always recommended in recovery to look at the similarities, you know, because it's always people are having their own personal experience. And the last thing I'll say before I introduce my guest to you today is that while there is this experience of, you know, maybe the programming and, you know, building upon itself, the negative programming, and getting more and more digging into addiction or into more toxic relationships, or, you know, whatever, each person is still, in my opinion, a soul having a human experience, and it's their walk. And it's oftentimes that in the darkest moments that we get to finally a place of meeting ourselves and having that surrender, and then turning around and having just a spiritual experience. And next thing you know, down the road, with other incremental decisions and steps that bring us out of that, we get to a place where we could be helpful to somebody else. And it's nothing more powerful than somebody who's been there, being able to talk to somebody who is there, you know, and somebody who is there wanting to hear what somebody who's been there has to say. So definitely welcome today to this episode on the tunnels and homelessness, and going through what we went through, and waking up. And so I'm going to introduce you to my two friends here. One is Beth Brower with 13 years of sobriety. She's had some time in the tunnels, and she's going to talk about her experience. And then Paul Vautrinot, and he's from Shine a Light, and he's going to share about that whole experience. And if you don't know what that's about, they're an organization where they bring supplies, and they go into the tunnels, and they talk to people with real talk, and extend a real strong, clear hand with a solution to anybody who's ready, without judgment, with a full understanding of why somebody would want to stay, as well as, you know, what's offering the experience, strength, and hope of what's on the other side. So we're going to start off with you, Beth, and you can share a little bit about yourself.
My name is Beth Brower. I was born and raised in western Nebraska. The western end of the state of Nebraska, there's only about one city that's of any size, and it's named Scottsbluff, and it's about 400 miles from the other two largest cities in Nebraska, which are Omaha and Lincoln. My dad was a lawyer, and he was county attorney. He was coroner. He was just about everything that ended up with the legal end, and he went on to be involved in politics too. And where I was born and raised, I came out of the womb different. I came out with a lot of allergies, a lot of food allergies, and didn't know how to cope with that a lot. My parents took me to the doctors and allergy doctors in Cheyenne, Wyoming, because there was nothing in western Nebraska. When I was 4, the first big trauma, which I think is very common with a lot of people in recovery, the first big trauma that happened to me was that there was a head-on collision when we were taking me to the allergy doctor, and my mom was crippled for the remainder of her life. I was 4 years old, and my dad got the call that there'd been a fatality wreck out there, and he came out there to us already being transported to Cheyenne. And So a combination of the separation from my mom. I had twin brothers at that time that were 2 years younger than me, and there was a big separation of time. Spent almost a year in the hospital, and my dad did the best he could with us. And I started school the following year with all these allergies, and I was taking my lunch to school with things that were made out of buckwheat flour or rice flour. That's stuff that's good for you now, right? And I from the very beginning was felt different, and I was teased and I was bullied a lot, and I did a lot of fighting. And I got my first phone call home from kicking the windows out of the bus on the kindergarten field trip. Just behavior like that just never fit in. And when I was 11 years old, through some circumstances, I discovered alcohol and weed, and from there it was on. And I chased that feeling for a really, really long time. I chased it, and I had a lot of buildups. I was a swimmer, and I swam and went to college and swam on a Division II team, the first team that had the first year they had women swimming. In 1978 at Drury College in Springfield, Missouri, and I built that up and then tore that down by getting caught with paraphernalia going to the national meet, and so that eliminated that, and just a lot of build-ups and build-downs. My brother, who had a learning disability, I decided that I watched him suffer through that, and I decided I wanted to teach children. So I went to school to become a special ed teacher, which I did, and I did a really good job at that, and then I didn't, right? So
were you drinking while you were teaching? And
yes, okay. And I would do things like the build-up of getting things really good and then doing something stupid and pulling the rug out from underneath me and then reliving that cycle over and over again. Sometimes I hear people call that insanity, and for me it really wasn't it. I would do the same thing over and over again, knowing exactly what was going to happen and doing it anyway. Right, that's what insanity was for me. And I eventually was Special Ed Teacher of the Year for the state of Texas in 1989, and 5 years later, you might want to leave the state. And I came running to Las Vegas, and my addiction followed me. And eventually, I relived that same cycle here, and I ended up homeless. My parents had bailed me out numerous times, had got me help numerous times, and this last time they were done, I got caught in the classroom, and I put the cry out for help, and while I was getting help, they were packing up everything I owned and putting it in a storage unit somewhere in this town, and had left and gone back to their retirement. And I ended up on the streets. And my first couple nights, I'm not quite sure where I was. I had a little bit of money in my pocket. We know what I did with that. And I ended up waking up half dressed, tied to a park bench. And some guy informing me that I couldn't stay there that way, that I'd get in a lot of trouble, and he helped me out, and we walked, gave me his shirt to cover myself up, and we walked down behind Palace Station, and I was introduced to my first tunnel. And that's where I proceeded to spend the next 8 months.
How did it feel when you first went into the tunnel? Did you feel
I was going in there thinking that he was going to beat me up and kill me, and I was ready to die, and I really didn't care. I had gotten to a point that I couldn't live with the things I was doing, and I couldn't live without him.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did, and a lot of things happened in that tunnel. I had a lot of sticky fingers in there. I couldn't keep my hands off of other people's stuff, which doesn't go over very well at all. I lost the fingernails that way. I also had teeth removed that way. And then I eventually would have to go find a different tunnel to stay in. And I did that until God intervened. And he intervened in, as I say, in the form of an author and a book. And while I was down there shortly before I went down there, a man by the name of Matthew O'Brien had written a book called Beneath the Neon, which was a dark story of the tunnels. And what he had done with that book is he had made it viral. It had gone viral big time, and there was publicity on a 2020 special. My parents saw me in the background with special on him. They flew to Las Vegas, and they hired a private detective and went looking. A couple weeks later, they did find me. I said I didn't want to help, and I turned my headlamp off and started running. And they came back the next day and drugged me with something and threw me over their shoulders and carried me out of the tunnels. I was half my body weight. It was 72 pounds when I came out of that tunnel. And then took me to my mother and my father, and they were at the Hampton Inn. And they asked me if I wanted help one more time, and I had this moment of clarity. And then my mom asked me if I would want to take a shower, so I got in the shower, and she turned on the water and pulled the spigot up, and I screamed bloody murder because water was hitting my back for the first time in about 8.5 months. And
wow.
My 80-year-old mom, fully dressed, got in that shower, crippled and all, and bathed her 50-year-old baby. And so I went to get help, and have not looked back. And you would think that's where my story ends, but it's only where it begins. Mm-hmm. Several years later, I had been doing this journey for about 8 years, and I had the opportunity to share my story, and somebody that was present knew that author, and that author didn't even live in this country. Tell me there's no God. That's one of my favorite sayings. Yeah. Tell me there's no God. And they got a hold of him, and he friended me through social media, which I proceeded to drop my phone and pick my phone up and call a friend of mine. And she said, why don't you start by hitting accept? And I did, and we started talking, and then he started talking about that he was writing a book on the bright side of the tunnels of people that had survived. At the time, I was really having a lot of PTSD from the tunnels. I was having a lot of different things happen to me down there. I was not a nice character. They didn't let me stay in one tunnel very long. I went around a lot, and all of my own making. And so I was really skeptical to do that, and we were going to do it via social media, or via virtual on a Skype, and then we started talking. He says, no, I want to fly back and meet you. So on December 20th of 2017, I got to hug the man that saved my life, and then sit down and answer his questions.
God, I keep getting chills every time you say this part. I love it. Wow.
Yeah, and then, to make the circle even more of a full circle, then he said to me, he said, there's this place you should go to down here in town. It's called Freedom House. You can go down there and ask for this guy by the name of Paul V. You need to get involved in this organization that I started called Shine a Light, and hand it off to him when I moved. And so I did go down and introduce myself, and through my developed friendships over a period of time, about 3 years later, maybe 2 years later, I was able to return to the tunnels with them, and be totally comfortable doing that. Since then, I've been down one other time. I will be doing it more often.
Did you recognize anybody when you went back down there? Is there anybody that you?
No,
I know you were like going from tunnel to tunnel and didn't really make a lot of friends.
No, but not at all. And it was at this point I was about 8.5 years away from there. Almost 9 years since I've been there. The only time I've had anything like that happen was when I had some people that were exploring the idea of maybe doing some of the things I had done to stay away from drugs and alcohol. We're exploring that avenue, and I had them in my car, and we watched a car wreck happen right in front of us coming at an intersection and flipped the car. This guy flipped the car, and
Jeez.
3 people took off down one street. 2 people took off out on the other street, and I asked anybody in my car if anybody had warrants. No one did, so we waited for the cops to come, and then the cop that came was talking to us, and he kept turning his head really funny. He finally looked at me and said, "Half pint," and called me from my street name, and he immediately had me with my hands on the hood and spread and was patting me down. All these women in my car were freaking out, like, what's going on? And then he cuffed me and went and ran my ID and came back and told me I cleaned up really well, and I thank you very much. I have done away with all those extracurricular activities for quite a while. But yeah.
Wow.
I have had one other experience, which was very difficult to deal with anybody in there. I had somebody that had done some harm to me down there that was reaching out for help, and I happened to be in a situation where he was in the same facility. And I have a good friend of mine's ex-husband. We had a texting thing going that when this person showed up to this facility, that I would let them know so that I could get to my car safe, because I felt like he had as much right to be there as I did.
Yeah.
He had as much right to
but
try to get what
trauma,
I got.
I mean, too, like, you don't know where his head's at, and all the stuff that you experienced that you're still just beginning to really heal, like, at that point, right?
Right.
That's hard.
So, yeah, and, my experience has been that, how do I say this? That there is always, as long as somebody is breathing, there's hope. As long as somebody's breathing, there's hope.
Yeah.
You know, But that's basically.
I think that's interesting because oftentimes, like you were saying about your parents giving up because they had helped, they'd helped, but you didn't want the help enough, or you weren't ready at the time. I think that's a struggle that a lot of people go through on the other side of that, whether you're even in recovery yourself and you know somebody else who is struggling to stay or get sober or whatever. I had that experience. My family was done with me, even though in my opinion, they never started with me, but I digress. I didn't feel like they were there in the first place, but I was left at the hospital. I was left there for 2 months, and nobody visited me, and they were like, she's going to die, and I'm like, well, it's really good that you got into acceptance, but I know, like, when somebody's done, but your parents sounded like they tried so many times to help you, and so now, like, there's this last time of somehow they knew, somehow they saw you, somehow they knew this time we just have to do it, and this time, was it being in the shower with you that had that moment of just shifting you? What was it that made you this time say, you know what, that's it?
It was the look in my mom's eyes, and I had watched my dad was a politician, and I watched him go through a lot of things. I saw my dad cry 2 times. One of them was that day that they brought me there, and the other one was when JFK was shot. And I distinctly remember those 2 times in my life. And the beautiful thing about my parents was my mom passed shortly after I had been free of drugs and alcohol for a little over 3 years. And my dad passed on Christmas Eve, 4 days after I met Matt. And so that day, I was here in Vegas. I've been hired, fired several times on my journey, and this was one of those fired times where I didn't have a whole lot of money to get anywhere. So I was going to spend Christmas in Vegas, and it was Christmas Eve, and my words were something like this: "Hey, Daddy," my brother had the phone and the hospice, and they were all in the room. And, "Hey, Daddy, it's okay to go be with God." I said, "A few days ago, I met the tunnel man, as you called him, and it was magical and miraculous. And, Daddy, I'm going to be all right. Been at this for almost a little over 8 years now, and it's okay for you to go be with God." and my dad died within a minute of that conversation.
And, again with the chills.
Both my parents passed seeing me sober. And
so beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing your story.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to go to break right now. Please remember that the opinions expressed here are strictly those of the people who gave them and do not represent any 12-step program or should replace your own intuition or professional medical advice. See you in a bit. Welcome back to The Real Recovery Show. Remember, you can watch us on Facebook, YouTube, and on Amazon Fire TV. You can listen to us on the PHLV radio app. You can get our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. And you can go to the meeting space and click on The Real Recovery Show and see all of the episodes that we've ever done so far posted up there. We post it every week on Fridays at noon. Sometimes it's live, sometimes it's pre-recorded. And so stay tuned with us. And if you would like to be on an upcoming episode, or you feel like you have a good topic, or you'd like to recommend someone, please contact us via themeetingspace.com or click on the intake form, which you can find on the page that has all the videos that says The Real Recovery Show. So now we're going to hear from Paul, who's going to share a little bit about his story and how he got involved with Shine a Light and where it is now, etc.
Yeah. Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me, Beth. Always a pleasure to share this space with you. Yeah, I mean, my story's, different, but not different in many respects. I started, pretty normally, I think. Went to high, school. I really enjoyed school. It was kind of an inherent thing with me as I loved school. My mom was addicted to substances when I was growing up. So right around the age of 8 years old, she kind of left my life on a consistent level, and I ended up living with some family members for a little bit and really kind of journeying through a lot of different situations with a lot of different adults that took me in for a year at a time. And I've always kind of looked at that as a blessing, I think, because I had this opportunity to learn all these different perspectives from some really, really cool people. And that dichotomy, I think, retrospectively has served me extremely well. I was really angry about it as a kid, and I think naturally, emotionally, like discovering yourself, kind of learning like why did this happen to me, playing that victim role for a long time. I was, blinded by really what I was getting, but like now in this space in recovery, having, kind of gotten through that and survived all that, a lot of those tools I was given from a lot of those different, situations has really, served me well. But it's interesting because, like, with my mom being, the source of that ire, I suppose, I had drawn these really firm boundaries as a kid that, I would never do drugs and I would never drink and I would never, and
right.
and like Beth said, I found myself, discluding myself or creating excuses in my mind that I just didn't fit in. And I was in a situation. There was, the love of my life in the 8th grade, and I had been head over heels with her since the 6th grade, and we were in a room together, and her older brother and her and some of his friends were smoking pot, and I'm sitting in the circle, just happy to be a part of, and by the time that the the bong, it was a bong, made it to me, I didn't even think about it, right? Like I just took a hit, and it was weird. You know, I had this firm stance that this would never happen, but in this social situation where I just desperately wanted to be a part of, and I wanted to fit in, it was like none of that came to. And my wife says it beautifully. You know, my standards lowered faster than I could allow them to be lowered, and that was kind of the trajectory that I was on. You know, for a couple years, it was like, oh, you know, I don't do drugs. I just do the hippie drugs, right? Like I smoke pot and some mushrooms here and there, and maybe if you had some acid, and and it's funny. The more I tell this story, the more I realize it's usually always tied behind a girl, and I think
sure, it's always women.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's really even on like, you know, a romantic level. I think that there was some mommy issues. You know, there was, and even today, like I find that I communicate very well with women. I feel very comfortable with women, and it's always very been platonic. You know what I mean? But a friend of mine comes in and she had, you know, some meth. And I'm like, yeah, you know, I guess that's what we're doing today. Right. And again, like from this really hard, firm stance of I only do hippie drugs, right? Like, and the standard got lowered. And I was in this really interesting situation because I had decided that I didn't want to leave these families anymore. I didn't want to live in this situation I was in anymore, because the way it was set up, my grandmother was in recovery. And she had a lot of high hope for my mother to find this thing. And so she wouldn't allow her to lose custody of me. And the way that had to be set up is that I would live with a family for a year, and I would have they would have temporary custody, and then I would have to move, because if any of those families held it for longer than a year, they could potentially take custody. And so I would cycle every year through these families. And every once in a while, my mom would show back up and disappear within a blink of an eye, and the process would start over. And I got kind of sick and tired of that at like 16 and a half. It was really the tail end of my junior year in high school. And I went to my mom and I said, you know, you got to sign these emancipation papers. Like, I'm done. I'm over it, or I'll never talk to you again, you know, like, and she did. She let me off the hook. And at the time I was living with my uncle, who, you know, God bless him. He was one of us. At the time he had 7 or 8 years in recovery. And I just kind of turned my back on him, you know, and I packed up all my bags and I walked out of the house in the middle of the night, and off I went and started. And I just, you know, justifying my actions by like, don't you understand how hurt I am, don't you understand how, you know, I remember thinking like, they always lied to me, they would never tell me where my mom was, they would never tell me the truth, and really I never really recognized it as they were protecting me, you know,
right,
and I treated them as if they were liars and not protectors,
right,
and to no fault of my own, but, you know, 16 and a half year old wisdom, right? Like, I just, you know, which is none at all, right? Like, it's very emotional at that point in the game. And I land in this house that we called the Clown House.
Okay. And
we called it the Clown House because I had gotten accepted into the Las Vegas Academy of the Arts out here, and I was a theater major, and we had this little crew of us that were really into juggling, really into that slapstick kind of comedy. We had developed a few like stage shows that the school had allowed us to put on, and it became our little niche, and we kind of became popular for it. That's what people knew us for. And so we dubbed it the Clown House. Of my best friend, his mom at the time, you know, got us the house. And God, I wish we had honored that situation more, because for her it was pure altruism in regards to me. She knew what my circumstance was. She knew where I would be if she didn't do it, and she did it. And she put me and her son in this house, and we move in half of the 12th grade class to this house, right? And and it just becomes this flop house for high schoolers, you know. Yeah. And it's funny, we had this rule that like we would only lock the door on Wednesdays. And I don't know what it was about a Wednesday. You know what I mean? Like I don't remember what the logic behind that was, but Thursday through Tuesday, it was just this revolving door of parties and alcohol and you know, marijuana and very innocent high school stuff. But I love, you know, in some of the literature that I'm in, I start to forge this weapon. And a lot of that is, not only justifying what it is that I'm doing, but becoming a master manipulator to the point that I'm manipulating myself, right? And getting, even my grandmother, as I stated, was 27 years in recovery by the time she passed. I knew how to form and warp the opinions, and I learned how to lie in a way that, 9 times out of 10, I was given the benefit of the doubt. And through that process, like, I kept digging this hole, and nobody could realize that I had a shovel in my hand. And I think that, those that did trusted that I had some kind of control. One of my uncles once said to me, I just thought because of what you saw your mom go through that you would have been better prepped, And I think a lot of people, kind of gave me that benefit of the doubt. Right. And I was successful in all other respects. Right. I graduated high school at the top of my class. I had some college, opportunities for theater. And I think that I put on the show, well. And one day, believe it or not, a girl walks in the house and she says, opium. And I said, yeah, why not at this point in the game, right? Like, everything else has been yes, so sure. And we start dabbling in opium, which I come to find out was not opium. Like, turns out there's no opium on the West Coast. There's only heroin. And and it's an interesting journey we go on with this, because we do it for like 2 months straight. And one day we just decide we're done with opium, and we all get sick, right? We all get the flu, and I remember we all worked at the same Subway, and we're like all calling out. And the owner's like, "You are my only employees. You can't all call out," And we made it. My first time withdrawing from heroin, I just took a bunch of mushrooms and thought like I was having a bad trip. Like, I just didn't realize what was happening. So fast forward a little bit down the line, and I do it again. And we do it again, and we go another, couple months, and we decide we're done with opium again, and we get sick again, and we're all at Subway. And my friend walks behind me, and he says, "Man, it's crazy, like, that we're all sick like this again." And it clicked, and I remember, like, my mom, and it all, like, flooded into my head, and I just looked up, and I said, "We're not sick, we're withdrawing." And once I turned that key of revelation, it was over. We took our tips, we went and bought some more heroin, and we were well immediately. Right, because that's the answer. It's not get off of this stuff. It's we have to make sure we don't withdraw. Right. And it was over. Yeah. The first time I was able to withdraw, and I made it through, no harm, no foul. But once I knew I was withdrawing, it was over. Yeah. And it didn't take long for things to escalate. I was 18 years old by the time the mom kicks me out of the house. Rightfully so, no harm, no foul. I completely, ran through that entire situation and abused all kindness that she showed me. And I was on the streets in 90 days. Mm-hmm. And I quickly burned a lot of bridges. And, I realized one day I'm living in a car with a guy named X. I'm sure that wasn't his legal name, you know what I mean? But that's what he had me call him. And I'm like, what am I doing? Like, I need to change my life. And so I call my ex-girlfriend from high school, and she's in LA. And I'm like, all right, like, I'm going to go to LA, and I'm going to fix my life. And I come to in Juarez, Mexico, which is on the border of Texas, like El Paso or something. Mm-hmm. Not even understanding how, like, I was going west and I found myself southeast. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm standing in line with a backpack trying to get back into America. And I get to the line, and the guy's like, where's your passport? And I'm like, I don't have a passport. I have a Nevada state ID. And he's like, what are you doing in Juarez? And I'm like, I have no clue. Like, and he takes my backpack, searches his backpack. I have a mixture of Boone's Farm and Jim Beam in this backpack. And they let me back in, and I have the Greyhound bus ticket, right? And it turns out I'm on my way to Florida. And, all my blackouts, like, I could, when I start to come to, like, I start to remember moments, right? And so I realized, like, I did make it to LA. I was out in LA for a couple of days. She was going to go to Washington, and so I just decided to go to Florida. And why did I decide to go to Florida? It was because my dad was in Florida, and my dad hadn't been in my life since I was 3 years old. So I'm like, perfectly stable bridge to burn.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like I had to start from scratch, and that's what I proceed to do. And I get to Florida and I do just that. They don't have heroin in Florida, so I get to Florida and they have pills that they're paying $1 a milligram for, and I'm like, man, like, you guys are wasting money. And I start FedExing heroin from Vegas. Oh my God! and I become the heroin dealer on this island, and oh man, and all the while, like I know what I'm doing. All the while, my confidence, my self-esteem is shot. There's nothing in me, like no matter what, and no matter what was said to me, I was resigning to this lifestyle more and more and more. And I think some of it, consciously, and I think most of it subconsciously. Yeah. And I steal a bunch of money from my dad's best friend. My dad kicks me out. My grandfather calls me and tells me that my grandmother's dying of cancer and she wants me to come home. And so that's what I do. And I go home and I come, to my surprise, I'm not welcome home. Just my grandma wants to see me, right? And so there's this funny little dance that happens where the family's keeping me at arm's length, but my grandma wants me close. And I manipulated that situation, and I stole money from my dying grandmother every day for about a month, every time she would let me in. And I knew that she was going through chemo, and what would happen is she would get sick and have to go to the bathroom and let all that out every day, and I would hang around until that happened, and I would slip into her purse and I would take every dollar in that wallet out every morning. And again, in the moment I don't recognize these things, but retrospectively I realized that my grandmother knew I was stealing from her. Of course.
How can you not know? The money keeps going.
And she kept putting it back, right? And
wow.
And eventually my grandfather's like, you gotta go. And I hit the streets, and it's weird, this whirlwind of like, now I'm homeless sets in and survival mode kicks in, and it takes me some time, and I usually say it's about 3 weeks. Like, I really don't know the time. Like, there's this real truth of mine is that from the moment I picked up heroin to the moment I put it down, I really can't tell you time frames. I just know these things happened, right? Like, any sense of time is lost on me. But I realized I didn't really process that I was homeless until one night I'm sitting there and I'm in, they have these dumpster encampments and with like commercial, right? So there's these 3 big green dumpsters, and I arrange them in such a way that I can sleep behind the 3 of them without the store owners knowing that that's what I'm doing. And I've got my little camping light, and I'm a reader. I'm an avid reader. I've always been an avid reader, and I'm reading back there, and I fall asleep with my book on my chest, and it starts pouring rain. And I'm mad because my book is ruined and whatever. And it's like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, but Vegas is a 24-hour town. I'll be just fine. And I grab all the stuff I can grab, and I try to go in every store at this storefront, and every single one of them kicks me out. And I make it all the way down to the fast food joint that I'm like, well, they're going to have to let me in, right? And they don't even let me in. And I'm standing outside in the pouring rain, and I'm like, where can I go? And I have nowhere to go. And it was in that moment that that real... holy crap, like, I'm homeless. This is real. And I do what we do, and I numbed it. I numbed it as fast and as hard as I could. It was very shortly after that I picked up the needle, because up into that point I was only smoking. And I started, mixing heroin with meth, because now I'm homeless and I need some fuel. I need to be able to survive and make it. And I was homeless above ground for a little over a year until I ran into a group of guys that invite me underground, and it was a game changer. Instead of having to pack my bags every day, instead of having to carry my whole life on my back, they told me that this was my spot and nobody was going to mess with it, and I could leave my stuff there and it was safe, and the only thing that would ever take it was the water or me breaking their trust. And they laid out the laws of the land and how to enter properly and the noise to make so that they knew it was safe. And just they gave me the rules, and I experienced some very dark, tragic things down there as well. And I remember that too, that shift of I'm no longer on this level of like society. I'm in this very primal state, and that happened real early on. We're down there sitting around a campfire underground in a tunnel, which is crazy if you think about it, but drinking, Budweisers, and this guy's girlfriend walks in and he starts screaming at her, I told you this is my safe space, you're never allowed down here. And she doesn't listen and comes in, and he gets up and beats the living crap out of her. And instinctually I'm like, that's not okay. And I look at the guy next to me and I say, you know what, are we just gonna let that happen? And he looks me dead in the eye and he says, let what happen? What are you talking about? I don't see anything. And I knew what he was telling me is that it was none of my business.
Yep.
You know. And again, my standards start to drop faster than I can allow them to, right? And I dig in and I live this lifestyle, and I start selling heroin because I don't want to spange and I don't want to steal, and I'm watching everybody go down, and I thought I was this brilliant, you know, mind. And there's these flood drains that are connected all over the streets that say, you know, do not litter runs to Lake Mead. And I mapped them all out on a bicycle with a flashlight attached to them. And what I would do is I would sell drugs through the drains from underground from the guys above so that nobody would ever catch me. And I thought it was the most brilliant thing ever. And turns out it was, because they never caught me doing it. And I just broke every rule they ever gave me. But at that point in the game, like, I had the money and I had the clientele and I had, you know, and so instead of them kicking me out, they left. And the next thing you know, I'm down there by myself with my girlfriend. And, you know, she's not happy, I'm not happy, and there's really nothing to be happy about. It's just this primal mind state of survive. And I'm walking through the tunnels one day. She pulled a knife out on me, and I wasn't cool. That wasn't cool, you know. And so I leave, and I'm staying in a different set of tunnels down the way, and I remember thinking, like, what am I doing? What am I doing out here? Like, all the things that I learned from my mom, like, you know, the success that I had in high school, the success that I had in theater, the opportunities that I had collegiately, like, what am I doing? Living in a flood drain, putting a needle in my arm, like, living to take the next shot. And
these moments of clarity.
Yeah, well, and yeah, you know, and then I answered myself with, why are you asking yourself that? Like, it's too late. It's too late. You're going to die under here with a needle in your arm. You're going to die. Stop trying to convince yourself that there's any chance of changing this situation. And I felt relieved at that thought, because for the first time in my entire addiction, I had succumbed to the thought that I was a drug addict that would die using drugs. And there was relief, because, like, hope is like a scary thing when you're out there, you know, because it's not obtainable. And
yeah, especially because, you know, incrementally when we go into whatever we're getting involved with, we get further and further and further away from the life that we thought we were supposed to have and the thing we're supposed to do. And it becomes that bigger, that much bigger, that much like harder to jump that, you know, because how do you get back there?
You don't.
You know? Right. And so, but the stress of it, and this is where I'm supposed to be, and then seeing other people that you knew having a life that you thought you were supposed to have.
Oh, man, and it was bad on my end. I go to this prestigious performing arts high school. These kids are on Broadway. Yeah. These kids have got recording labels. These kids are, you know, I mean, just successful. I'm like, Facebook has got to go. Yeah, yeah. I can't stand to watch the level of success that, you know, my peers were having. Too. And yeah. So fast forward, I go back to see her. She takes 2x4 to me, and I'm not cool with that either. So I'm going to plan my escape, because this was 2 violent attacks in the last couple of weeks, and I want out. And I've told this story over and over and over again, and so I'll fast forward through it. But essentially, I'm sitting there, and she falls asleep on me, and I'm waiting for her to fall asleep for, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 days, you know, so I can leave. And I have this idea that I'm going to just go live in another tunnel on the other side of town, but I got to do my heroin first. I got to get high first. And she finally goes out. I lay it out on my lap. I turn my headlight on, and I start to, you know, get my shot ready. And I see this cricket kind of hop into my line of sight. And I start talking to the cricket, because I too have been up for 4 or 5 days, so why wouldn't I, right? And
it's when the cricket talks back.
Yeah, that's when you have the problem. Well, I don't really remember what the cricket said. I just know I was talking to it, and it gets to my feet, and I just remember saying, don't you do it, and it doesn't listen, and it jumps up at me, and I wig out, and I spill the heroin all everywhere, and so instead of doing the shot, I think now the cricket has to die. I have an instant resentment. I chase this cricket around in the pitch black for 2 hours, can't find it. She starts to get restless. I'm like, crap, I gotta go. I sit back down, and the cops hit the end of the tunnel, and I know it's them because they have these really bright flashlights that I'm super jealous of at this point in the game. And they run my name, and I have warrants. You know what I mean? That's the long and short of it. And had the cricket not shown up, I would have been gone, right? And
Interesting.
And I get out, I get put into drug court, and I buy in. And I only buy in because it was monsoon season, and I was smart enough to know at that point in the game not to go back to a flood drain while it was raining, you know? Right. And slowly but surely, like, I start to piece things together in spite of me, and I just, you know, and eventually what happens is, like, the day comes where I have a chance to make a decision to go back or stay, and I realize, like, hey, this is not so bad. And, you know, my life just unfolds from there. And I don't know how. I didn't make any plans. I didn't even make plans to stay sober. Right. Like, I just kind of participated in the process, and it all kind of starts working, and I start working in treatment, and I run into Matthew O'Brien for the same reason Beth meets Matthew O'Brien, is he wants to write this book. And we're talking about, you know, the tunnels, and he invites me down, and I'm at a really decent point in my recovery, and we go down there, and I'm working at a treatment center at the time, and you know, I kind of see what he's doing, and I ask him at the end, I'm like, hey, what do you do if they ask for help? And he's like, oh, I just link them in with, you know, a community organization. And I was like, well, you have these really good relationships with them. Like, you should be the one that helps them. Like, it's hard for us to trust people down there, and they seem to trust you. Yeah. And he says, well, that's interesting you would say that. Like, I asked you to come out here because I'm looking for somebody to take this on. Yeah. He's like, you know, I feel like as an author, as a journalist, I've taken this as far as I can take it, and I really want to see it become what it could potentially become. And he leaves the country, and 3 weeks later, and hasn't been back permanently since. And I just start developing this little idea that maybe we can be the ones to help the forgotten underground, and only because I understand how hard it is to gain their trust, and even how much harder it is to nurture it, right? And that's, you know, so fast forward 5 years, you know, I feel like we've done that job, and we've honored that space, and we're welcome into most every tunnel in this city. And I say most only because I don't know that I've been to all of them, but everyone we go to, we're welcome in. And this year we've helped out 285 people from homelessness, and we have 70% of them are still sober and housed today.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it's not me. Like, really, like, I'm an idea guy, right? Like, it's this team of, you know, 100+ volunteers that consistently puts the work into following this thing and helping me develop this thing. Because the truth is I put this thing in a box when I first got it, and I was like, okay, well, we'll do this. And if somebody asks for help, I'll put them at crossroads, right? Like, and then some more people come in and they go, well, what about this and what about that? And I just happen to know the people and the things that I can call to make that happen. And every time I put it in a box, it's like it blows out of the box. And I learned, you know, just like, you know, in my recovery, like, the development of Shine a Light isn't predicated on my best thought. It's predicated on the community and the people around me, and how can we carry this thing. And what it's developed into today is humbling.
It's very inspired.
Yeah, it's humbling for sure.
That's beautiful. I love that. When I was when I was a stripper, I worked in New York, and we always got off work at 4 o'clock in the morning when the club stopped. And one day I was driving to a bagel place, and because there's nothing like New York bagels in the morning. And I went, and I'm driving, and it's the middle of the winter, and I see, I'm driving down this road, and I see a couple, and they're sleeping on the road, and behind a bus thing. And I had just gotten cash from working, and so I stopped off, and I gave them money, and I asked, you know, intuitively how much to give, and I gave them money, and I asked them, do you need this? Do you need this? Do you need this? And no, we don't need food. You don't. No, we don't need a blanket. Nope, nope. Of course, do you want money? Sure, we do. Sure, I'll take money. Yep. And of course, they'll take money. And then, but then I went to the bagels, and I came back, and it was just sitting on me. I must also say that I have a lot of codependency in my story, but I went and I asked them. I was like, "Do you have a place to live? What happened and how they got evicted? Yada yada yada." I got them set up with the government, getting all their benefits back again. I co-signed a thing for them to go and stay in an apartment, and helped them to budget out their money on how they were going to do it, and ended up, they missed their dog that they lost and went to a rescue thing and got these dogs. And, it was a very humbling experience because this was before I went through my down, lost everything experience. And then years later, I had epilepsy from all the stuff that happened with the drugs and everything. And I couldn't drive a car for years. And so I had to take a bus. And I was on this bus and I see the woman. And this was an older couple. Her name was Florence or Flo. And I saw her, and it was like so surreal because I saw her years later on the bus. And I got off and I said, "Do you remember me?" And she vaguely remembered me, which, by the way, hit my ego because I was thinking she would be like, "Oh my God," but no. And so I was like, "Okay, so what happened?" And she said that, well, it was okay for a little bit, and then they fought, and he used the money for gambling, and then they ended up. He ended up locking the dogs in a bathroom, and it's to spite her, and I couldn't handle it, and I cried so much because I thought, I had helped somebody, and I thought it would make a difference, right? And it was just such an education because the truth is, I've had such low bottoms in my own life, and people have had hopes for me to be better, I'm sure. But it really is like when that old adage, when the pupil is ready, the teacher appears. When you're moved to do something, do it. And maybe not everybody will climb all the way out, but man, you have a really good success rate of people coming out.
Sure.
To whatever.
But I also think that it's not about getting them out. It's about being human. It's about connecting with people that otherwise have lost faith and hope in that connection, right? And I think that what we've gained, I think our highest success really is truly that they know that they have people. Yeah.
I hope, I've seen people because, I have the meeting space with so many people coming in and out. Not so many people relapsing, but so many people coming in out of the meeting space, and then people that you get really close to and they relapse. And we've had people die. Somebody just died weeks ago of an overdose, and it is what it is. But it's really important that we're connecting on a soul-to-soul level. That we recognize that all the story of who we think we're supposed to be and what we think was supposed to happen by this time of our life, and all the things that we think we did that we shouldn't have done, and all the shame that we're carrying, and all the perpetual uniqueness, and I think it's all about heart to heart. And I feel like the reason why they trust is because you're not coming with judgment, you're not coming with your have-tos, you're not threatening, you're basically saying, hey, I'm here to help in a way that I feel like could be the most helpful. And when you're ready, if, the hand is there, the flashlight, and
it's even more basic. It's also, what do you need right now?
Yeah. Right.
What do you need right now? You don't even have to come. I don't care if you ever come with me. I'll keep coming back to see what you need right now.
Okay.
And I just, you were talking about it when we were off air, and I just think it's super important to acknowledge, we get into this systematic way of treating and dealing with the homeless, which is kind of just ignore them, act like they're not there. And that help plays into our separation from hope, right? This idea that I can get help kind of just gets further and further and further because people don't even really acknowledge that we're there.
Right.
Right? And so for me, it's I don't even have to be the one to help them. If I'm the one that shows them that there's somebody out there that's willing to meet them where they're at over and over again, so that when the day comes that they do want help, so they trust somebody with that ask, cool.
Yeah. So how does somebody get in touch with you if they want to help with money or resources or go with you into the tunnels?
Sure. You can email is probably the best form, is paul@shinealightlv.com. We have a website, which is www.shinealightlv.com, which has a contact us button. It has all of our phone numbers on there as well, a way to reach out. And we just start the conversation from there. We have a lot of different ways to volunteer, give back, be a part of. Like if you're not ready to go underground, we do bag packings on Wednesday to help set up all the stuff that we bring out underground. We do sandwich makings on Friday. You can help us make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to get to us Friday night so that we can deliver them Saturday morning. Like we really have a lot of different ways that, you know, if you just want to spend some time giving of time, you know, we would love to have you join us.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing your stories. They're both very, very powerful, and thank you, Beth, too. And so exciting to be able to have these different topics where we have real conversations with real people on real recovery. And thank you for joining us today on the Real Recovery Show. We'd like to give a special thanks to our sponsor and gracious host, PHLV Radio here in Las Vegas. See you next week.